I think that if you're an individual looking for the rational path forward, what you want to do is embrace technologies or ideologies that reinforce individual sovereignty and freedom, and they're rational. So hence Bitcoin. Look at the past year. What you've got is a drawdown of all financial assets. So the NASDAQ is down about 22% over the past year. And so NASDAQ represents tech companies and all the risk assets. But on the other hand, if you were to go and look at like the bond market and the bond portfolios, bonds are down, like the BOND index, the long bond index. It's down almost 17%. And the reason it broke in March of 2020 is because interest rates got pegged to zero. So after we had lowered interest rates from 5%, 5.5% to 5 to 4.5 to 4 to 3.5 to 3 to 2.5 to 2 to 0, and left it at zero, then the debate was, can they take interest rates negative? I think what happened here is the Fed just pumped tons and tons of liquidity, and we stayed high for about a year and a half. And I remember when Jerome Powell said, "I'm not even thinking about raising interest rates," and said strongly that it'll be till 2024 before interest rates start coming up again. We took the cost of money down faster than any time in history, and now we're jacking up the cost of money faster than any time in history. And the result is that all the traditional models are broken. Let me give you a 2-year post-mortem since we started dealing with this issue. MicroStrategy had a $500 million of cash, and we saw interest rates at zero, and we saw the stock market inflated in the summer of 2020. And we said, well, what are we going to invest in? And we looked around at everything. Should I buy gold? Should I buy land? Should I buy art? Should I buy some crypto asset? And what's going to happen next? We bought $250 million of Bitcoin August 10th, 2020. And then around September 10th or so of 2020, we bought another $175 million of Bitcoin or something like that. And then we started buying Bitcoin more in December, and we kept buying Bitcoin. We ended up buying nearly $4 billion, $3.97 billion of Bitcoin. MicroStrategy has just bought as much Bitcoin as we get our hands on since August 10th of 2020. And in that time period, stocks gyrated north, they gyrated south, currencies have changed. So let me tell you what's happened. MicroStrategy stock, our stock is up 94%. So, summary for us, MicroStrategy's strategy was buy as much Bitcoin as you can and buy it with equity and debt. We borrowed money. We borrowed $2.2 billion at a blended interest rate of like 2% or 1.8%. So we borrowed cheap money while money was cheap, and we bought Bitcoin. Now people are saying, that's stupid because Bitcoin was trading up and then it traded down. At the end of the day, if your time horizon is a decade or longer, if you can borrow the money for longer than 5 or 6 years and you can hold it through the volatility, then raising cheap money, grabbing billions of dollars at low interest, and then investing in a scarce, desirable asset that's got sort of a technology appeal and holding it for a long period of time, that's going to be a good strategy. That's why our stock is outperforming Bitcoin. That's why we're outperforming all the enterprise software companies, all the big tech companies. And the reason Bitcoin's outperforming all the other asset classes is because it's scarce, it's desirable, it's technical. No one's going to write a piece of software to make gold better. They basically put public policy initiatives ahead of the interest of the free market. right? So if I declare a war, I could just draft every single adult in the country, put them in the military, send them off. And if I lose the war, they're all dead, right? What's it do to the economy? The economy crashes, right? What's it do to the prices? Well, the price of everything go up. If you want to create inflation, you do it a couple of ways. Either you cut the supply, or you cut the supply of the product you want to buy, or you increase the supply of the money that's available to buy it with, right? I don't even need to print more money, right? I can create inflation just in a war, like in World War II, we have gas rationing. You have food coupons. Why? Because all the gasoline gets shipped off to Europe to put in tanks or to put in airplanes or put in ships. So when you have policies that are declaring a war on something, you divert resources. So we had a war on COVID. We have a war on carbon, an energy war. If I decide I don't want you to burn coal or oil, then I drive up the price of energy. If I decide I don't want you to show up in your office, I drive up the price of production. So we've got lots and lots of wars. Right? You've got a culture war. You've got a war on office work. You've got a war on carbon. You've got a war in the Ukraine. The war in the Ukraine has escalated, right? It's not just a war in the Ukraine. It's really a kind of a quasi-economic war on Russia. So when we actually imported Russian sanctions, we cut the amount of gasoline or the amount of fuel available in energy. We drive up the price of energy. So every single time you actually put a public policy in place, you create inflation. Policy is inflationary. The more policy you have, the more inflation you have. Yeah, good. The road to hell is paved in good intent, right? People get into positions of power and they want to do good. And so they do good by issuing edicts, executive orders, policies, regulations, and they think that the regulations will make things better. They believe that if you enter into government and politics, you believe the political process is a way to make the world better. So let's take nuclear energy, right? The cleanest form of energy is nuclear energy. It's the cleanest, probably the safest. Nobody died at 3 Mile Island. We can't hardly trace a death from nuclear energy in the U.S. And yet we haven't built a nuclear power plant since the creation of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission 50 years ago. And in Germany, they shut all theirs down, right? And in Japan, they shut all theirs down. And anybody you know that's a billionaire, right? All of these names, the Sergey Brins, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musks of the world, they didn't get there without holding an asset that had technical potential for a decade or longer. There's no get-rich-quick scheme. So I think that people want an easy route. If you're trying to get a quick win with no volatility, with no risk, doesn't make sense. And if you're actually trying to be successful in a hurry with volatility, that probably still won't work either. I mean, ultimately, success comes from taking a decade-long view. The challenge with money is the fiat currencies that are used commonly as money, they're all broken. They all have a big hole in them. We could call it inflation, but inflation is such a charged term because most people think inflation is CPI. The defect in fiat currencies is monetary inflation. It's the expansion in the money supply, not just the increase in consumer goods, because the CPI is it's a sub-metric. So the problem, coming back to money, is fiat currencies aren't anchored in energy. When we were on the gold standard, theoretically, during the gold age, 1870 to 1914, if a dollar was convertible in a 20th ounce of gold, right, and you really pegged it hard to gold, then you're anchoring the currency into a hard asset. Now, gold isn't fixed in supply. The gold supply increases at 2% a year. In COVID, everything doubled. And so you started seeing a much more rapid collapse in the value of fiat currency. The US dollar expanded the money supply 15 to 20% a year. And so in the US, we expanded the money supply maybe 40%. And so US single family homes went up in price 40%. The only thing that's different today is that technology allows for the centralization of more authority. If 1 billion people are all getting their information on one website, then whoever controls that website can control what information flows to those 1 billion people with a flip of a switch. I think that if you're an individual looking for the rational path forward, what you want to do is embrace technologies or ideologies that reinforce individual sovereignty and freedom, and they're rational. So hence Bitcoin, right? Like if you have a bunch of money and you have a choice, are you going to buy $1 million of gold and put it in a bank of a centralized institution that will seize it? Are you going to buy $1 million of land in the middle of Beijing where the government of China could just take it from you? Are you going to buy $1 million worth of a stock in a Chinese company? How about an American company? How about an Argentinian company? Or are you going to buy $1 million worth of a crypto asset that's in cyberspace beyond the reach of a government or a corporation? And so clearly, the answer is if you take all of your money and all of your power and you put it in the middle of Beijing, right? They own you. So if you're looking for sovereignty and freedom or a rational path forward where you get a choice, then you need to actually put your property beyond the reach of a government that might be irrational or that might be capricious. If you had a choice between being rich and living in Texas or being destitute and living in California, would you cling to California and be destitute, or would you be rich and live in Texas? Because that doesn't seem so controversial. Isn't it obvious that you would like the option to live in the place that will allow you to breathe the air freely and conduct your business? Right? When one place says you can't sit at dinner with your family and the other place says you can have dinner with your family, you're going to want to leave from point A to point B. So you won't be able to do it if your property is fixed, right? A lot of Jews died in Nazi Germany in the 30s because their property was fixed in Germany. They didn't want to leave and they got trapped there. If their property had been in a crypto asset like Bitcoin and they could have left, they'd be alive. And it's not that hard to make that point. And you can illustrate that with every expatriate and every immigrant fleeing, every war zone.